Well, today we begin a new 3-week sermon series, and I just ask, before we read the text for today, I would ask you just to think about right now about what your attitude is, or sort of where your heart's at right now when you think about generosity and when you think about giving. And let sort of that be the theme for this morning and for the next few weeks. I want to talk about our attitudes around generosity. This reading comes to us from the Gospel according to Luke, from the 14th chapter, starting in verse 16. Then Jesus said to him, "Someone gave a great dinner and invited many. At the time for the dinner, he sent his slave to say to those who had been invited, 'Come, for everything is ready now.' But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said to him, 'I've bought a piece of land and I must go out and see it. Please accept my regrets.' Another said, 'I've bought 5 yoke of oxen and I am going to try them out. Please accept my regrets.' Another said, 'I've just been married and therefore I cannot come.' So the slave returned and reported this to his master. Then the owner of the house became angry and said to his slave, 'Go out at once into the streets and the lanes of the town and bring in the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame.' And the slave said, 'Sir, what you ordered has been done, and there is still room.' Then the master said to the slave, 'Go out into the roads and lanes and compel people to come in, so that my house may be filled. For I tell you, none of those who were invited will taste my dinner.'" The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Well, as you have probably picked up on, we're doing something a little bit different up here. And I'm also going to be donning a bit of different attire this morning for the remainder of the sermon, at least. And I want to give you a bit of a glimpse into my childhood for just a moment. I was very blessed, I would say, to have an extra set of grandparents. I had my dad's parents and my mom's parents, and then there were Uncle Eric and Aunt Evelyn. Eric and Evelyn were actually my great uncle and my great aunt. They were my dad's uncle and aunt. And they lived pretty nearby to us, and as a result, because of their desire to be a part of our lives, they invited us over quite a bit. They were oftentimes at our house, came over for special celebrations. They were just a part of our family's life in a way that I didn't get to know some of my other great aunts and uncles if they were even alive. Eric and Evelyn were folks who didn't have a very high level of education. My Uncle Eric was an auto mechanic. He spent his days repairing vehicles. My Aunt Evelyn worked from home as a seamstress. She made slip covers for people, and that's how they got by. They lived in a working class suburb near my hometown. They had a World War II or post-World War II era house that looked virtually identical to every other house on their whole street and on the surrounding blocks. Probably 1,000 square foot, 1 bedroom in the house, but they converted the upstairs attic into bedrooms and finished the basement over the years. Aunt Evelyn was kind of a slender woman with big, poofy, permed hair, always chomping on a piece of gum all the time, and she called everyone Toots. Uncle Eric was a bigger guy, kind of a bald, hardy guy, always kind of had a personality to match his look, kind of a jovial, happy-go-lucky kind of guy who was always happy to see us. Every year at Christmas time, Aunt Evelyn insisted that we come by the house because she had a Christmas gift to give us. Every year that gift was a pair of tube socks. She had a pair of tube socks for every single member of the family. Men, women, young, old, everybody got tube socks from Aunt Evelyn for Christmas every year. They had a jar or a little dish on the hallway in their home that had some taffies that were always just a little bit old. And I always took one and always thought this tastes a little bit old, but always did that. And And so they lived a very happy life of relatively modest means, but they were content. They had so much joy in their hearts. And the thing that I remember most every single year is that they would invite the entire family. And when I say the entire family, I mean my grandfather and all of his siblings, all of their kids, all of their kids' kids, and in some cases, all of their kids' kids, over to their house on a Sunday afternoon, usually the Sunday right around New Year's Day. And so we would all go to their house and descend on this tiny little home for what became known as Ebbelskiver Sunday. Now, Ebbelskivers are a Danish pancake dish. We have a picture of it in case you've never had or seen one of these. They are made in a pan that looks just like this. This is my Ebbelskiver pan. And you prepare these by pouring dough or batter into the dish, and then slowly you begin to turn them until it's almost a completely closed sphere, and then at the very last minute you drop in a piece of sliced apple before you roll it over and complete the closure of the sphere. And so we have had these every single winter on Ebbelskiver Sunday because this was a family dish. This was a family recipe. And it was one of the rare traditions that carried over from great-grandfather John to our family from Denmark. So we got together, sometimes probably no fewer than 50 people, probably not many more than 70, packed into this house. And as you would walk in January, the windows would all be fogged up because there were that many people in this tiny little house. And you'd walk through the kitchen to get into the rest of the house, and 4 men were always the ones cooking the Ebbelskivers. Now, Aunt Evelyn was continually rotating in another egg casserole in and out of the oven that she had been preparing for several days. But the men were all in the kitchen, on the range, on the stovetop, and on these portable ranges that we'd plug into the wall and any other surface, making these Ebbelskivers. And as a batch came out, it went down the stairs into the basement, or it went into the hallway, or it went into the porch, or it went into the living room, or it went into the other bedroom that was a makeshift dining room. Because the only thing that you were asked to bring on Ebbelskiver Sunday was a card table and 4 chairs. And so we kept expanding the dining room table until it poured out of the dining room into the hallways, into the living room, onto the porch, down into the basement. And there were people everywhere. It was very hard to get around on Ebbelskiver Sunday, but it was a house that was packed with love and delicious food. And this became one of my favorite childhood traditions. In the parable that you just heard Jesus tell, there's a bit of a setup to the parable. It's the Sabbath day, and a Pharisee has invited Jesus to come over for a dinner. Jesus raises some eyebrows, a lot of eyebrows actually, because he heals a man on the way into the dinner, which some people said he shouldn't be doing because it was the Sabbath. But he goes into the house and he immediately watches as the guests start jockeying for position of who's going to sit where at the dinner table. And they start to take the places of honor near the host and the hostess of the gathering. And Jesus says, when you go to a gathering, you should really take the seat that is furthest from the host. And then if you're invited to move up, great, but don't presume to sit at the place of honor. Then he goes on and he talks about you should also not just invite the most distinguished guests, but what about the others who are forgotten about? Should you not invite them? And then he just launches into this parable of this man who wants to throw a banquet. And all of his friends, everybody on the guest list, the original guest list, turn him down. They've got other things that they need to attend to. Something about an ox, something about being newly married, something about purchasing some land, and everybody turns them down. And you heard how the rest of the parable goes. He says, okay, just go into the streets, invite everybody. And he ends up inviting all of the people from society that might be seen as not honored guests, even undesirable. Come, there's a feast. Come and join us. So I imagine that things turned a little awkward at this dinner party that Jesus is at. I mean, he's come in now and he's violated the Sabbath. He's insulted the guests, potentially, and maybe insulted them a second and a third time. But it's a powerful message that he offers. And I think it makes the people think about who's there and also who's not there. There's a similar story in Matthew's gospel where Jesus tells the parable a little bit differently, or at least Matthew's retelling of the parable is a little bit different. He says that it was a wedding banquet, and that a man is throwing this banquet for his son and his son's bride. And he says that all of these people who were supposed to show up failed to show up, and so, again, the host says, go into the street and invite everybody, for the table is prepared, the feast is ready, come and dine. So how are we to understand this? What exactly is Jesus talking about? Now, the one idea that we could come away with is that if we look to the rest of the New Testament, we start to see that sometimes the church is referred to as the bride of Christ. So is Jesus telling this story as in the father who throws the wedding banquet for the son is really about God throwing a feast or offering a gift to humanity in the form of Jesus and his marriage to his bride, the church? And then who is invited and who will turn away from the banquet and who will be included in? And maybe the people who we wouldn't necessarily think of right off the top of our heads are actually the people who are invited to the banquet in the end, or who bother to show up. I think that's one powerful telling of that, or interpretation of that parable. The other interpretation, though, is about, are we on that guest list? And I don't mean that in terms of like who is saved and judgment and all of that. I just mean societally, in the social hierarchy. When it comes to things like banquets, guest lists, opportunities, generally speaking, a lot of us would probably think that we're on the guest list. But who's missing? Who's not on the guest list? And maybe even more importantly, when we throw a banquet, what are the motives behind that? If we were to offer a great feast, and we were to invite lots of people, who would we invite? Would we invite our closest friends, the people we're most familiar with, the people we already know? Would we invite people whose status is something to be desired, and with the hopes that there would be some reciprocal behavior? If I invite them, maybe they'll invite me to their thing someday. I think that if every one of us is honest, we have invited somebody to something, whether it's our home or an event or a special occasion, or I've got tickets to a ball game, for somebody that we think, because maybe then there might be something in return. There might be a favor returned to us someday. But the person in the parable throwing the banquet doesn't seem concerned about what he will get in return. It's more about the desire to share the feast. The feast is ready. I have food to offer. I have this great gift to give. Now come and participate in it. And as I got to thinking about my aunt and uncle, Eric and Ev, I looked at these people, and it never occurred to me as a child, but it does now, of what they chose to do with their meager resources. Every year, it was most important to them to put on a party where they lavishly fed sometimes 70 people in their home. I don't know what the cost associated with that was, but as I said, we were never asked to bring anything to share except a card table. That was just so that we could keep expanding the table. And what started off as just immediate family grew into the extended family, and then it was friends, and then of course it was, I've got a visiting friend from out of town, or I've got a girlfriend or a boyfriend, can they come? And everybody was invited to Ebelskiver Sunday. It was almost as like, why do we even have hinges on the door on this day? Because people kept coming and going all day long, and all of the neighbors knew about it. And the beautiful thing is, when I was in college, Uncle Eric died. And the family knew that the tradition needed to continue. And so my Aunt Elaine took up the mantle, and she began to do Ebelskiver Day. And all of a sudden, family members started to say this tradition is important. And so I got my Uncle Eric's apron that he would always wear when he cooked his Ebelskivers. Relatives were going to estate sales from immigrant families to see if we could find Ebelskiver pans before you could get them at Williams-Sonoma. And so this, I don't know how many years or generations that pan has been used, but I got it as a gift at my wedding shower. And it's mine now. And I've taught my kids how to do this. And some of you have been over to my house to receive Ebelskiver Sunday. And now it's tradition too. Whenever we have a snow day, if we get one this winter, you're all invited over. We're making Ebelskivers. But this is the idea, is that it was never for Eric and Ev about what they get out of it. It was just a desire to purely share. It was an impulse to be generous. It doesn't matter what it costs. This is about something that we can show as an act of love to the people that we care about. And bring your friends, bring your neighbors. Everybody is welcome. Everybody, just bring a table, bring a chair, add on to the banquet table. We're all invited. We're all a part of this together. When we think about what it means to give, and we talk about generosity, and we talk about finances, we talk about stewardship, so often our places move into that scarcity mindset about, well, what is the value I'm getting from my dollar? Or what will I see in return? Or what does this translate into? And I don't think it's necessarily wrong to ask some of those questions, but when it comes to giving as a response of our faith, it should be one that starts with an outpouring of gratitude. It's not about a get, it's about a give. Or put it differently, to quote our former district superintendent, who loved to say, it's not about a got to, it's about a get to. And I've got to be honest with you that sometimes my heart isn't always in that place. Sometimes it's about something that feels more like an obligation. But the idea for us as people of faith is to move out of that realm and into the get to area. When we give, it's not about paying dues, it's not about church tax, it's not about guilt. It's more like the opportunity to throw a feast, the opportunity to share. You know, last spring, the Sunday after Easter, many of you were here as we had our first church potluck in who knows how long. It seemed just like a great thing to do. We were going to have one worship service at 10 o'clock, and afterwards we could all share a great feast together. And we put a very long banquet table in the back of the room, and it was so popular that people said, let's do this again. And I said, pump the brakes, let's wait until after summer, and then we'll do it again. And we had another great experience. And I heard so many people telling stories about what it is that they brought. And this is a favorite dish. This is a favorite recipe. Oh, this is one that my husband really loves. And we have some of those stories in our home too. When Eleanor and I were first starting to date, I had to drive far away for a conference. And when I got back into town, Eleanor said, come to my apartment tonight. I'm making you dinner. And she made this chicken dinner. And I was so lovesick I could barely eat it, but I choked it down. And it was delicious. Don't get me wrong. It was delicious. I just was very excited to be with her. That is now known as Catch Me a Husband Chicken in our house. And it will be something that I'm sure will be jotted down on a recipe, and whatever it was named, it is now not called that anymore. And so that will be something that is passed down. And the Ebelskiver, the well-worn Ebelskiver recipe, has been passed down and shared many, many times. And so in that spirit, I want to tell you about something coming up. This week, everybody in the church is going to get a letter in the mail. And in this envelope is going to be a letter from me talking about our stewardship campaign. But also, there's going to be your estimate of giving or your commitment card for 2024. And the card looks just like this. And it's what you've come to expect in the past. It's an opportunity for you to be thinking about what kind of gift financially you're going to give to the church in 2024. But the difference is that this year, on the other side of the card, is a recipe card. And I know that you have stories that are attached to dishes or to recipes from your family. Maybe it's not an ancestral thing or something that carried over from the old country. Maybe it is, but maybe it's something as simple as this is the dish we prepare every year on New Year's Eve, or maybe this is something that we eat at birthdays in our house. But if there's a story behind a recipe, we want to know it here. We want to know what it's called. We want to know what family sent it. We want to know the ingredients and how to prepare it. And we're going to put together a catalog of all of these dishes. But not just that. On October 1st, 2 weeks from today, we're going to have our Commitment Sunday. And it'll be an opportunity to come forward with our pledge, with our recipe, but we're also asking you to bring that dish that day. Yes, I will be making Ebelskivers the day before, but we will be having a potluck of a different sort. This one is going to be a lot more about recipes of the heart than anything else. So bring the dishes that have a story and plan to sit around tables with friends and new friends to share the stories behind those dishes. And to remember that much like giving to a feast or contributing to a potluck, that is what we do when we share our resources with the church. We come together not as a got to, but as a get to. What can I share? How can I tell the stories of the way that these dishes have affected my life, to the ways that this church and this church family continue to impact my family and loved ones? And as we break bread, as we share in this meal, we'll remember what brings us together, the opportunity to come forward as Christ's bride, the church, to come to celebrate at this great wedding feast that we partake in every single Sunday when we come together for worship and leave this place prepared to serve our neighbors, to share Christ's love, and to extend God's grace to everyone we meet. Will you pray with me?